Welcome everyone back to another episode of the Coach Mo Murphy Show. As always, I am your host, Coach Mo Murphy, and we are back. We're back. It's been a couple of weeks. The college football playoffs has been played. We've had the first round, and now we are on to the second round. I got a million thoughts about everything that is unfolded, even to the point that one of the things that I tweeted out about was replied back to by RG3 with three simple letters that creates one simple word, which was win. And that word is why guys like Robert Griffin III and probably there's a side of college football that felt like JMU, and Tulane deserved to be in the college football playoff because they won their conference, and because basically the rules of the college football playoff and having to have five conference champions, and because the fact that Duke beat Virginia in the ACC championship means you weren't putting a five-loss Duke in the college football playoffs, is how we got from not just one G5 school in probably Tulane, but how we got down to two and added JMU into the college football playoff. Now, I am all for the G5. I recorded probably a month ago talking with my guy Jeff Hunt on one of these shows, and I was a big advocate for the G5. Like, I had went to the North Texas versus USF game, like where it was North Texas' first sold out game since I don't know how many years. Like, that was a build up prime time football on ESPN on Friday night. Like, they took on that game. It was a big deal. And like, it was like a G5 game of the year, essentially, when you look at some of the G5 games. And USF went in there and like steamrolled North Texas. And to me, that kind of took the juice out of the G5 for the rest of the year. Like, this is a USF team that had beat Florida, but then got steamrolled by Miami. So kind of got put in a place of where we look at them at college football. And then also, I mean, you've seen what happened to Florida, as the season went on. So it wasn't, the USF beating Florida wasn't as impressive as it seemed when they had beat them in the moment. But that, to me, I honestly feel like when USF blew out North Texas, that took the juice really out of the G5 as far as what you thought and how they would compete in the college football playoff. Mind you, Tulane had played Ole Miss earlier in the season and lost 45-10. So you have references of where some of these possible G5 representatives, like how they panned out against Power 5 schools, really how they panned out against playoff teams. Tulane gets a rematch against Ole Miss. Now, maybe they even felt like with Tulane versus Ole Miss, all things considered, obviously Lane Kiffin is no longer the head coach there, as he took the job at LSU. John Summerall is now taking another job, but he's there to coach, he was there to coach the playoff game. So maybe they just thought two teams, both with plenty of other things on their mind other than the playoff, this would be the best matchup. I don't know, but Ole Miss handled Tulane, and this got back the conversation of like why G5, and this was prior to JMU coming out there and playing Oregon. Now, my problem with JMU, well, before we get there, Tulane got steamrolled. So everybody who felt like there's like the G5 should not have to have a guaranteed spot, let alone, I think the problem was we had two of them. Like, maybe if instead of JMU Oregon, you get Notre Dame versus Oregon, everybody isn't as upset about the Ole Miss and Tulane result. Like, okay, we had to have one. We know one game is going to be bad. Maybe they could have upset them. They're just not there physically, and maybe there's some lessons to walk away from that. But then you have to turn around after that game, after watching Miami, Texas A&M battle it out 10-3 in a defensive dogfight, in order to go on to play Ohio State, which obviously we'll talk about here in a second too, being that I'm an avid Ohio State fan. But then you follow that up with the primetime night game is JMU versus Oregon. And the talent disparity was just, I mean, it was clear as day from the time it started. I mean, Oregon took the kickoff back. Like, they were one missed tackle away from taking the kickoff back. So you could clearly tell, like, JMU doesn't belong. And here's my thing with the G5, though. I say all of that to say this. I think had JMU and Tulane played each other in a playoff game, I think that game would have been immaculate. I think that game would have been elite. And had North Texas got another shot at USF, had, Memphis playing Navy, like that. So I think the G5 should have their own national championship with the Boise States and like the Mountain West programs and the Washington State and Oregon State, like bring them in the G5, have one of those former Power 5, Have one of those former Power Five members be one of your, bigger programs in the G5, but you got your Memphis and Navy. Bring Army in there. Take on, like, the Army Navy rivalry. Maybe there's a time where they could play twice in the same season because of the college football playoff, the G5 edition. Like, ESPN could take that on and make a lot of money. Those matchups now, would 4.6 million people watch it? Maybe not. Maybe not. But who's to say, like, that's kind of your audience? You have the gauge on that when those matchups are played throughout the season anyway. So what I don't understand is why they can't have their own national champion. I think if you make that as a playoff, like, it'll be a lot more interesting. I think, and here's the thing, people are saying, well, you're an elitist or you don't really love college football. But, like, how about 16 different G5 schools still have a playoff to play for instead of playing in these meaningless bowl games where some of their guys are transferring and their coaches are taking higher paying jobs? What if that brings enough extra money that this doesn't have to become a farm system, and, like, it could be a true system of, like, you could go to Memphis and really farm people from Memphis into the NFL if you buy into the program in this NIL era? What if that is a possibility? What if over time, it'll take 5 to 10 years, but that G5 national championship will really mean something? It'll have some matchups. Maybe it'll create a dynasty on the G5 level that everybody will be paying attention to. And then maybe it'll include a special edition where you add them into the playoffs. Maybe it's one of those situations where you create a new tradition out of the G5 and it takes time. Will it be effective next year if you implemented it? Probably not. Probably not. It wouldn't be as exciting, but it takes some time. But, like, these people that really love these programs, now you're just turning into, like, a farm system to be put on display for half your roster to be gone. Like, and you don't have the money to keep up with the fact of, like, the talent. You might have been able to upset a Auburn 3 years ago. I don't think a JMU is beating an Auburn now. Like, the talent, because of the money poured into these programs, the talent level is just, it's completely, you know, it's completely different now. And I don't think it'll ever get back. I don't think you'll ever have as many NFL players. Now, there'll be former James Madison that went to Oregon, or former James Madison that transferred to Ole Miss, or former James Madison that transferred to Wisconsin. But I don't think you'll have 8, 9 different NFL players, NFL caliber players on these type of rosters anymore. And that's the thing. You won't have the Cincinnati Bearcats. You won't have the Boise States from back in the day. Like, you won't have the teams that have players that are going to the league anymore, because these programs, like these other programs, now are paying top dollar in this Power 4 league. So it's just a different league, but you could have a G5 national championship and you can't tell me that it wouldn't mean something. It just takes some time. You're treating it like, people are treating it as if we're calling, like, this G5 championship like the in-season tournament for the NBA. It's not, but it's going to take some time. Like, the first national champion is always going to be, it'll be memorable, but you're going to tweak some things. You're going to figure out some things. Maybe you go from 16 to 24. Maybe that's what it is to save that league as a whole, so you don't have these coaches that are there for 2 to 3 years, build winning programs, and then move on to Power 5 jobs like they're doing currently right now. Like, these players don't play here for a year or two, ball out, and then go to Alabama or Auburn or Ohio State or Michigan or whatever, right? Like, there's a way to save this league and really make it matter. But putting Tulane versus Ole Miss after already losing the game 45-10, and putting JMU versus Oregon, who, like, the final score doesn't really tell you how bad the game was. It was 36 or 34-3 when Oregon went in cruise control. Like, they knew they had the game. Instead, I would have rather seen those two teams play each other. I'd have rather seen Ole Miss versus Oregon, and I would have rather seen Tulane and JMU. But I wouldn't have wanted to see Tulane and JMU where one of those teams automatically advanced to the next round in this in the 12-team college football playoff. I would have loved to see them two teams play in a matchup in the G5 college football playoff to determine their national champion, just like the FCS does it. I think you could do a 16 or 24 team, and you can have those 6, 7, 8 premier teams, that are there to watch it in the playoffs every year. Like, that's something that you could do on the G5 level. But enough of that. So, on that day, everything was played out. I was watching the Miami Texas A&M game closely, obviously, because I'm an Ohio State fan. Get something to drink. I'm an Ohio State fan. So, I was sitting there watching the game closely. Defensive battle. Miami won. Ohio State has Miami. That's just kind of how I looked at it. We get the winner of Miami, Texas A&M, and I can't wait. They're in Arlington. The plan is I plan on being at the game. Me and the wife, I plan on being at the game for New Year's Eve, bringing in New Year's Eve in Arlington, you know, to be at the Ohio State versus Miami game. A couple days go by. Okay. You know, we got Miami. Be on social media, like, and then you Miami fans just end up being on your timeline all of a sudden. And you remember, like, they're still holding on to a beef from over 20 years ago. From the pass interference call in the national championship that Ohio State ended up going on to win. Like, and they've created this, like, ever since then they've hated Ohio State, and they've created this rivalry in their head that I pretty much, I don't want to speak for all Ohio State fans, but I think most Ohio State fans will be with me when they say, like, I think this is a one-sided rivalry. I think we're just now learning as an Ohio State fan base. I know I am. I know I'm just now learning, like, as an Ohio State fan, how much we've been on Miami fans' mind, how much they've despised Ohio State. Like, I'm very aware that, Ohio State is despised by everybody else, and they think us as fans were privileged, we're spoiled, enough isn't enough. I understand all that of what they think of us, but I'm also fully aware of, like, who really despises us. And, like, I did not know it was Miami. Like, I know, when I talk to, the few Miami fans that I know, it's like, they bring that up, like, but it just seems like one of those, like, bittersweet moments type things. Like, we had y'all, but like, we did kind of end the Miami brand as a whole, because I did, I'm an Ohio State fan by default, but like, I grew up in Florida. And so I don't want to strike nerves when I say this, but from the Florida I remember, from everywhere, like, Miami was probably the third most relevant brand in Florida consistently. Like, it was Florida and Florida State battling it out, like, growing up in Florida in the 2000s and 2010s. Like, Miami fans were cool. Like, you would meet some Miami fans, but, like, a lot of times people that were Hurricanes fans too really wasn't into college football like that. Like, the Gators fans were diehard Gators fans. The Seminoles fans were diehard Florida State fans. But, like, the Miami Hurricane fans, like, they just loved the sport of football, and, like, y'all fool with Miami and the Hurricanes. Almost like probably their parents was, because of the nostalgia in the 80s and the 90s of the Miami Hurricanes football team. And what it was in Florida, a time with the music, and, Miami making its, like, run and putting Florida on the map as far as music wise on the national stage. So, okay, I understand that. But, like, Miami has never been the top brand in the state of Florida as far as college football relevancy. And so for them to have held on to, like, this pass interference call, and it's the older fans, like, the younger ones, they don't know. The players probably really don't understand. Nobody probably even was born, realistically. Well, in this NIL era and stuff, and this transfer portal, and this guys, still playing off their COVID year. I don't know. There might be a few guys that were born in, like, 1999 still playing college football and were at least alive when this college football game was played. But that's neither here nor there. Like, but for most of these guys, this game is like, we got Ohio State. And whatever their personal feeling about Ohio State is, that's how they feel. Whether it's a guy who feels like, he wasn't recruited by Ohio State and wanted to be, and that's going to be motivation for him. Whether hey, you told me I wasn't good enough, and now I'm here and I got a chance to prove on the college football playoff stage that, you made the wrong decision. You should have took me. You could, now I'm a wreak havoc. Maybe it's one of those situations. But for Ohio State, like, to me, I thought it was just another playoff game. That's what I thought. I thought it was just another college football playoff game, like, against a fan base that we'll have some fun with. But never did I think that Miami was really, like, fans were really going to get on this internet and really, like, turn this into a thing of, like, hatred towards programs, because Miami hasn't been on our radar since winning that game. Like, there hasn't been, even, like, when they beat us in their Super Bowl in 2011, in the year where, like, we had that deflated roster because of, the cheating, because of the scandal that we did selling tattoos and stuff for money, like, or, selling memorabilia for tattoos and money. You remember that? So we had beat them the year before, but then they beat us. And, I guess that was their Super Bowl of that. But like, I didn't know Miami. I thought Miami was just trying to build themselves into like national relevancy. It seems like they're just trying to build themselves into relevancy of like the Ohio State eye. Not like in comparison to Ohio State, just like they want to be seen by Ohio State. They want Ohio State fans to acknowledge that had the pass interference call went the other way, maybe Miami, remains a dynasty and Ohio State becomes this struggling program. And maybe that's a possibility, but what happened, and we're here 20 plus years later. That's my thing, is we're here 20 plus years later. Ohio State has went on to win multiple national championships while making multiple national championship appearances, while staying relevant in every era through everything that they have endured, right? For finding the right coach, essentially moving on from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day has been a blessing. As much as everybody wants to complain, like everything has went right for Ohio State outside of, the scandal with the tattoos and memorabilia and stuff, for jerseys and stuff, like with the Luke Fickell years in between. Everything has been kosher for Ohio State. Like they have been one of the top 5 brands. I mean, really, I'll probably say they're the number 1 brand in America in the past 25 years. But they've been a top 5 brand, just for argument's sake, in any era, in any, the college football playoff, they win the first college football playoff, 14 playoff. The college football 12-team playoff, they were in the first 12-team playoff, while looking like a possibility of being back-to-back national champs. And that's what we're going to get into here. But I didn't realize that Miami fans were really like, you would almost think we're playing Michigan. I think there's that type of hate, but I think it's one-sided. And I think now that Ohio State fans are learning this, that the discourse over the next week, leading up to New Year's Eve is going to, I think the tone's going to change as far as what Ohio State fans, what Ohio State podcasters, what anybody with Ohio State who's going to have an opinion, how they would have approached this game, as opposed to if they've been on social media, if they're into it the way I am, and the way, like, there's a whole community. It's not like it's just me and I'm tripping. But if they're into it and they're on that side of the social media aspect, then like maybe their approach towards how they feel about Miami is going to change over this week, and the discourse will change, because I know Miami feels like, they can play with us in the trenches, and their D-line and O-line are damn good. Trust me, they are. I respect Miami. But here's the thing. Everybody thinks the Indiana game is this blueprint. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe Indiana figured us out, and 10 points is the most we can do against a good defense. And if that's the case, that's not Miami. That's an Ohio State thing. So therefore, like, it's okay. Miami's one of those defenses that if that's the case, then that will happen. That's an Ohio State thing, though. Ohio State fans ain't like, we're going to despise Miami from here on out because they knocked us out in the college football playoffs. Like, we're not. We're going to look at Ryan Day and company and the staff on the offensive side of the ball to wonder, why is this a thing with all these playmakers that we have? That we've become so dependent that all we can do is, score 10 points against a good defense. We can't figure it out. But we've looked great and looked promising, but we never flipped this switch that we thought we had. And now Ryan Day is taking over play calling. And to me, just in these moments, coming off of losses, like, I remember 2020, Ryan Day, Clemson, beating the brakes off of Clemson. I remember, the game against Georgia, back against the wall. It became, basically we were dominant for 3 quarters. Marvin Harrison Jr. goes out. The offense changes. We can say what we want about that game. It seems to me like we hadn't addressed the biggest problem in that situation, which is the kicker. And that becomes a thing now. And I think that's probably the biggest problem of our offense, and why we're not good in the red zone, because we really don't trust our kicker. So we're not running plays in the red zone. We're not running plays when the field gets shorter. Like, we're very confident that we're going to walk out of there with 3. And sometimes when you do that, like, you end up opening it up just enough of a window to score 7. When you can live with the fact that you're going to get 3, you can shoot and, gamble for 7. every time you're in the red zone. And it seems like Ohio State like plays it safe. It tries to get as many yards as possible on each down, but without really taking any type of chances because there's no trust in their kicker. And it's been like that since the Georgia game, since it went wide left. But from the offensive play calling perspective, when Ryan Day made it known that he's taken back over offensive play calling, the offensive play calling has been nothing short of immaculate. And so there's no reason for me to think that that's not the possibility and the expectation. That's the expectation. I say that. Miami fans will tell you against that defense, it's impossible. I'll tell you, Miami fans, that I do think you guys need to humble yourselves just a little bit, right? Like, I think, if I'm not mistaken, like, I could be tripping, but I do think, like, y'all came in here being a borderline playoff team and you guys had 2 losses. I do think, like, your 2 losses was against Louisville and SMU, right? Louisville beat you 24-21. Florida State, who's horrible, put up 22 against your defense, right? Like, you beat Notre Dame. That's kind of the win that you lived on, and like, you should have got in over Notre Dame. That side I will sit on, because or else it would have been pointless to ever play Notre Dame. You should have got in. I feel like if the conversation of why you guys are in is because it was you or Notre Dame, I do think it was Miami was the right call. 100%. I do agree with that. But we got to stop acting like some of these games didn't happen where they scored points. Like, okay, Indiana beat us 13-10. Right? So, like, nobody's offense ever really looked that successful against us. That they have successful drives, of course. The Indiana's, quarterback makes some plays and makes some throws, of course. Like, through 4 quarters, when you win a game, like, you are going to have some points of positivity on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, unless it's like 3-0. Then you're looking at like neither offense did absolutely anything, and that was really truly a defensive slugfest. Almost essentially like what happened until Mark Fletcher bust open the game against Texas A&M. But that Miami Texas A&M game was like, we just couldn't score any points until Miami started having some success running the ball. And I'm looking at Ohio State and I'm just like, the way our defense has played, nobody, including the Heisman quarterback, has exposed that defense. Nobody has put up so many points that you're looking at this defense like, oh, they can't be had on the scoreboard. You're looking at it from an entire offensive perspective and understanding that them scoring 10 points against Indiana, them not crossing the 30 threshold against Michigan, a bad Michigan team, like some of those games that you're pointing to of like, I don't think this offense can really, really take off and doesn't have that level that you guys are thinking, is a possibility. But with Ryan Day saying, I'm taking over the play calling, and Brian Hartline is fully going to focus back on the receivers, I even think it's because, like, we're going to open this thing up, and I need you to have all those playmakers that we got available ready to go. I think we don't need to. Yes, we know they're going to come in and prepare to shut down or do what they can against Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, right? Like, that's going to be their plan. But we have so many other former 4- and 5-star receivers that if Brian Hartline for 3 weeks can put his all into making sure those guys are ready, I think we could trust that if Ryan Day decides to open up this playbook, these playmakers will be ready. Some of these guys whose names we haven't heard that often this year, I think are going to make an impact in this game. And I think that's going to be the difference, is the depth on the offensive side when Ryan Day does decide to open it up, because I believe he has to. I don't believe it's like, oh, this is one of those, like, we've been waiting. I believe he has to. I believe he has to send a message the same way he did against Tennessee last year. Like, it's almost the same thing, because Miami's coming in feeling good. They beat Texas A&M. They beat up an SEC team, overrated SEC team in my opinion, but they beat them up in the trenches. And so now they feel like we can play with the big bad Ohio State, because the last thing that you remember about Ohio State is that they lost that game 13-10 in the Big Ten championship against Indiana. They're 12-1. They're wounded warriors, right? They shed blood. They show vulnerability. And so that's what these Miami fans are banking on. But I think what's going to happen is the media over the next week is going to turn this into a game that I don't think it's going to develop Ohio State to have this mindset that I don't think Miami, y'all as fans really want those players to approach this type of game with like a real hate and a real despise for this team and a real put them in their place. Because they were just in this situation last year when Tennessee came out in Columbus talking about it was a Tennessee takeover and it was going to be all more orange than scarlet and gray in the stadium. And they came. They showed up. You know what I'm saying? They weren't deeper than the Ohio State fans. I think they had to mess around and find out, but they showed up. There was a lot of them. And there was a lot more orange than I anticipated. And the Tennessee players come out, shirts off. This cold doesn't phase us. We're on a different mission, though. And we have a bad taste in our mouth that got in the way of the mission. And that was the Michigan loss. Now, do I think this Indiana loss is the fuel to the fire that the Michigan loss last year was to that team that went on to win the national championship? No, I don't. But like, for this team to have to come with something to prove and for you to find a reason for them to come with the drool hanging, like the venom hanging from their teeth, to really send a message to everybody that Miami game was, that Indiana game was a one-off, and like, we're ready because the main thing is the main thing, and that's to win the national championship, and we're ready to put back on display why all season Vegas has had us as, and they're not thinking about Vegas. This is more the fan side talking. This is more the guy with the microphone talking, but like, why we've been basically the favorite to win the national championship, why we've been the most likely to be the ones to have a back-to-back national championship, because of the talent and potential that we have on this team, and because it's there. And with Ryan Day taking over this play calling, I think it's going to be a masterclass on the offensive side of the ball. And so now you're looking at Miami, and that's, do you think Carson Beck and Mark Fletcher and Tony can get in a shootout with this on this Ohio State's defense? And if you think the answer is yes, which you're either probably a Miami Hurricanes fan or you're a true Ohio State hater, but if you think the answer is yes, then this could not end up being the defensive slugfest that a lot of people are predicting. But if your answer is no, then my thing is, the concern for this will be, how does Miami respond when they're down 14-0 because they can't stop this offense? Now what? Like, because then Ohio State can slow walk the dog up to that point and just make sure that they keep the lead. And I think that might even be the possibility of, like, they jump out on Miami early, but like, then they slow walk the dog, and this doesn't really turn into the highest scoring of affairs. But because Ohio State looked dominant early, they'll never look back in this game as they go on to the next round, because I think that's what's going to happen. Like, if you didn't understand, I'm picking Ohio State to win this game. But I just, with evaluating this game, I thought it was a different feeling of like, okay, it's pretty cool. We get to play Miami. Like, that's dope. I know some Miami fans from, people that I grew up with back home and stuff like that. So, like, that's cool. One of my assistant coaches back when I played ball in high school was like, he was a big Miami Hurricanes fan, like a diehard Miami Hurricanes fan. Shout out to Coach Shane. But like, so I thought, that's cool to talk a little trash, but like, it's personal for them. It's personal for these Miami fans. And I think now that now that we're learning as Ohio State fans that this is personal, we'll address the discourse from here accordingly. You know what I'm saying? I think that's just kind of what I'm getting at. So, those are the two big topics that I really wanted to discuss, was the simple fact that I think the G5 schools need their own playoff, and the fact that Ohio State we don't care about Miami as much as Miami thinks we do or should. Like, you are no different. Miami Hurricanes fans, I just want you to understand before I move on. Like, you guys are no different than any other opponent that we could have possibly faced, outside of had you have been that team up north, outside of maybe had you have been Georgia in this round, outside of had you been like Alabama in this round. Like, the want for war and bloodshed wasn't there until like y'all started talking. And now we're realizing what the feeling is from y'all in this game. And so now, like, okay, in the media in today's time, like, what goes on the internet, it's going to be, the players see it. And we know in it on both sides. So whatever Ohio State fans say could end up being hey, man, y'all need to show them this. This could be their motivation for Miami. Like, so we know it goes both ways, but it always seems that when Ohio State and Ryan Day is back against the wall, he going to come out on top. And I trust and believe, like, we're not going to let the loss in the Big Ten championship be the determining factor of why we're not able to accomplish what the ultimate goal was coming into the season, which was coming into this season as defending national champions and defending our national championship to go on to win back-to-back national championships. And that's still the main thing, is the main thing. But I just think there's going to be a little more vicious and a little more biting, a little more dog in this fight from Ohio State than people would expect because of just the finding out of how Miami Hurricanes still feel 20 plus years later about this pass interference call. It really was news to me that it was this personal from you guys. But I want to look at, a couple of the other playoff games. So does Ole Miss have enough juice to beat Georgia? I honestly don't think so. I think the last time I seen Georgia play, they were physically just very dominant. I really trust this Georgia team. I think really my prediction is I think Georgia beats Ole Miss. I think Ohio State beats Miami. And I think the winner of the Ohio State Georgia game goes on to win the national championship. That's really where I'm at on that side of the bracket. I think the winner of the national championship comes from that side of the bracket because I think it's either Georgia or Ohio State. And I think it's the winner of the Ohio State versus Georgia game. Obviously, me being a big time Ohio State fan tells you that I would pick Ohio State in that situation. I think they'll go on to defend themselves as the national championship. If you haven't already picked that up at this point in the show, then you're understanding now that my prediction is that Ohio State is going to go in and they're going to win the national championship and they're going to be defending national champions. And I could, me feeling that way could come back and bite me in the ass as much as it would any other Ohio State fan that has that feeling and is voicing their opinion, whether it's on the podcast, whether it's on the radio, whether it's just among their friend group, whether it's, the group chat, whatever it may be, that thought and feeling might come back and bite you. But like, there's still Indiana beating us does not make me move off that feeling that I felt all year, which is I understand that the main thing is the main thing. And I think this team is primed to still, even slow walk the dog in order to win back-to-back national championships. And so I don't think Ole Miss to go back to, I don't think Ole Miss has enough juice. I think this is where the story ends. I think to have Lane Kiffin move on and be able to host the playoff game in Oxford and, basically beat up on Tulane, I think is really cool. Like, I think it was cool for, Lane to really not be there to have enjoyed that moment. I mean, Oxford, that on TV, like, even though I think everybody in that stadium and everybody else watching on the other side of the TV knew what was going to happen, but to see how Oxford still showed up and showed out and what it looks like, in Oxford, Mississippi for a college football playoff atmosphere, I think is like great for Ole Miss and, years to come. Like, if I was a future recruit who's, was committed to Ole Miss or whatever, I'm willing to play for that coach. Like, I'm thinking about that. Like, yeah, I definitely would go there. Like, we make the playoffs there. Look at that environment. So I think it was a cool story. I think it was a great look. I think, Lane leaving to go to LSU, you missed out on that one, buddy. You missed out on a special opportunity. And I think a lot of people will feel a lot differently about this Ole Miss team in this game if Lane Kiffin was still the head coach, but that just isn't the case. And I think Kirby Smart in Georgia, I think they're going to go on and, I think they're going to go on and do what they got to do. Now, Fernando Mendoza, right? There's two quarterbacks I think that in this round are very key who, is obviously the Heisman winner in Fernando Mendoza and the quarterback at Oregon and Dante Moore. Now, Fernando Mendoza against this Alabama defense, I think he needs to look really, really good. I think, these really good quarterbacks have kind of picked apart, have been able to manipulate this Alabama defense a little bit. Oklahoma started out, taking advantage of this Alabama defense, jumped out to a 17-0 lead, jumped on, Alabama's mistakes. But offensively, their quarterback just wasn't good. The quarterback play, not John Matip, but the quarterback play just wasn't there in that game to hold on to the lead and then ultimately be able to play tit for tat with Alabama when they tied it going into halftime. Like, now we got to play tit for tat, possession by possession. And you seen that just Alabama was able to basically dominate the second half because Oklahoma just wasn't able to do that. Even for every good defensive possession, they just aren't able to turn around and score touchdowns like that. So, with that being an issue, but like with them having been able to expose that defense at first when, kind of the script was in, I think Fernando Mendoza with being the Heisman Trophy winner, like the expectation, Indiana's 13-0 Big Ten champs with the Heisman Trophy winner. This isn't hate to say Indiana has to win this game. I think if you're an Indiana fan listening to anybody say like this is a must win for the Indiana Hoosiers, you got to feel great about that. You got to feel great that somebody will come out of their mouth and say, yeah, this is a must win for Indiana, because that tells you that the position that they're in, and that tells you the respect that we have for Indiana. Indiana showed me right now, until proven otherwise, they are the best team in the country. They went 13-0, and they beat who I thought for 12 games was the best team in the country in the Ohio State Buckeyes. I thought Indiana was the second or third best team behind us all along, all year. I feel like the rankings were pretty much right all year in that top three. I think it was fair. Had you put Texas A&M at 2 and Indiana at 3 at one spot, to have that Big Ten, SEC Big Ten, instead of two Big Ten teams being at the top, I could understand that. Because really, when you're 2 or 3, it really doesn't make a difference, right? But once they knocked us off 13-10, that's the best team in the country. Because when the two best teams in the country went mano a mano, they came out on top. So when you are the best team in the country and you are the number one seed coming into this playoff, you get a bye week. The expectation, I need you to get to the semifinal. I need you to get to the Final Four at the very least. I need you to win a playoff game. Getting a bye week was what you earned by what you did in the regular season and in the Big Ten championship, right? But winning a playoff game is proving how much of you are the best team in the country and how much you should have been considered a national championship title contender coming into these college football playoffs, right? That's your validation, getting down to at least being the Final Four. I one of the 4 finalists. And then depending on who you match up in the semifinal depends on whether, the expectation going in. I still think Indiana might be favored depending on who they play in that semifinal. I think Indiana will be favored in that situation too. So the expectation really probably with the side that it shook on, whether they play Texas Tech, whether they play Oregon, probably is that Indiana should make the national championship. And I think that's a fair assessment. It's not me hating saying that if they didn't make the national. Now, I don't think if they win this playoff game, if they beat Bama and then they go on to lose a nail biter against Texas Tech or Oregon, I don't think that this would make Indiana's season a bust or a fraudulent. No, they won the Big Ten championship. They go and they beat Alabama, in a bowl game, in a college football playoff game, and they advance to the semifinal. I think that's definitely respectable, having gone 13-0 and beating Ohio State. When you play multiple good teams, it does get tough. Having played Alabama and then the winner of Texas Tech and Oregon isn't an easy ask, for any team, let alone Indiana. So not saying they have to win the national championship or it's a bust of a season or they have to get there, but I do think it is a must win. And I think they have to beat this Alabama team. I think with this Kalen DeBoer in Michigan interest or smoke, whatever that's going around that's made it to national media, I think that's a big deal going into this game. And I think that's a possible distraction that I think a team like Indiana, who knows, we just signed our head coach to an extension. We got all these guys. Nobody's in the portal. Everybody all in on what we doing in the mission this year. I think that's where Indiana got the advantage. And the main thing is the main thing for them. There's no, nobody's leaving that program right now. Nobody's not all in on possibly being a national champion, bringing the national championship to Indiana. I don't think there's not a single person within that building thinking about anything else other than that. And I think just the possibility of where Alabama is, the smoke of Kalen Boyd, there's got to be something there. So when it reaches the national media, people can say, oh, they're running with this false narrative, whatever it may be. But once it reaches the national media, there was something there for it to take off and have some type of substance. Not saying that, if he does, not saying that if he wins and gets to the semifinal, Alabama fans wouldn't love for him to stay. I don't know how Alabama fans feel now about Kalen DeBoer after winning a college football playoff game. I haven't really seen her to talk to them as far as, their feeling on Kalen DeBoer. But if it's still getting smoked, there is a possibility that Michigan is waiting to go all in and they're waiting for, I don't know, are they waiting for Alabama to get embarrassed? If that's what you're waiting for them to move on from Kalen DeBoer, I don't think that's a possibility. But is Kalen DeBoer secretly on his way to Michigan unless he wins a national championship with Alabama? Is that a possibility too that nobody's talking about? And that's why there's smoke screen, just to have this discourse. But in Kalen DeBoer's mind, somebody knows within that camp that that's his possibility. Then, I guess we'll see. But this Indiana team, to say that this is a must-win game is a fair assessment for this Indiana team. And I think, I would say Ohio State people are going to say Ohio State got to win. Or else this was a failure of a season, getting to the Big Ten championship, losing to Indiana, and then coming around, having a bye week, and then losing to Miami. They would say it's a bust. The season was a waste. It was a failure. Almost every Ohio State fan will tell you that. You at least got to beat Miami. You can't get a bye week and then lose the playoff game that you play. You got to beat Miami. So it's a must win for Ohio State. And that's what happens when you're at the top. The expectation is when you're favored by 9.5. Now, maybe that's too heavy of a number. But when the expectation is that we expect you to win, it's a must-win game for Ohio State, at least within what we expect from the Buckeyes as fans, what we, in that expectation within that program, they have to win this game. But Indiana there is no like, yeah, but they had a great season. Nah, damn that. They had a great season. They got undefeated. They beat Ohio State. They showed you they could beat the best of the best. So now we expect them to be able to compete and play for a national championship. And I think Indiana's going to hold it down. I think Indiana is going to beat Alabama. If you're asking me my prediction, I don't know about a score. Haven't really thought about that far yet. But I think Indiana's going to beat Alabama in what I would say is a must-win game. So I am taking Indiana. So this is no shade, no hate at Indiana. But enough of being on the Indiana train. I talked about my Buckeyes. I want to talk, but Fernando Mendoza and Dante Moore, real quick before we close out here. I think these games are very important for them too in their NFL draft stock. I even think this game could be so important. Like there's a possibility that they're going to be able to. This game is so important. I think if being the number one pick is of anything of interest to them, both of them need to, Oregon needs to beat Texas Tech, and Indiana needs to beat Alabama, and they need to be able to have a showdown in the college football semifinal. Dante Moore versus Fernando Mendoza. I think in order to create the kind of hype that you're going to need to, after really, Fernando Mendoza winning the Heisman and kind of what we think is like a down year as far as Heisman seasons and who deserves the Heisman, how many names really we felt should be eligible for it and deserved it, kind of just a down year there anyways. But I think for those two to kind of on the back half of this season, kind of turn themselves into not only the number one quarterback in the class, but, the possibility of being a number one pick, depending on who gets the number one pick in the NFL. I think, you need to win a playoff game. So like Oregon won, but they beat JMU. You need to solidify that, beat Texas Tech. And you need to look good against a good defense in Texas Tech. And I think that's the expectation for Dante Moore and Fernando Mendoza. I think you need to be able to, expose the flaws within this Alabama defense and within this Kalen DeBoer team. And you need to go on and y'all need to be able to go mano a mano. And I think that'll build up the type of hype for a college football playoff semifinal, Indiana versus Oregon conference. Two Big Ten teams going at it in Indiana and Oregon, especially if you get like a UGA, Ohio State on the other side. 3 Big Ten teams, an SEC team, Ohio State versus Georgia. Because, yes, some of us Ohio State fans are still holding on to when Georgia beat us a couple years ago. Because had we not lost that game, we would have went on to win a national championship. Ryan Day should have had a national championship. So we do hold on to that. But I don't think 20 years from now, I'll be caring about that game. Like, damn, it'll just be one of those, damn. Had we won that game, we would have smoked TCU the same way and we would have won a national championship. But I don't think it'll be one of those, like, I didn't develop hate for Georgia. But if in this era, Kirby Smart and Ryan Day, we get an opportunity to get some get back, for beating us, I'm definitely looking forward to that. So we got to handle business against Miami. But in Indiana versus Oregon, Dante Moore versus Fernando Mendoza would probably have NFL scouts, especially those GMs that are looking at, especially those scouts that are looking at that top 5 to 10 and in that top 3 to 5 range, probably salivating at that matchup to be like, man, the two quarterbacks that I want to examine the most with the possibility of taking with the number 1 pick, number 2 pick, number 3 pick, a top 5 pick, a top 10 pick to be my next franchise leading quarterback are going to be in one stadium going mano a mano against each other's defenses that are pretty good. So I think that'll be a fair assessment to set yourself up. Dante Moore have multiple playoff wins going into that, winning 2. Fernando Mendoza, basically at that point, I think will have the offense looking good, solidified themselves as being the best team in the country and possibly being the team that should be favored to win the national championship going into that matchup against Oregon. And you'll have the guys who could be the future picks be mano a mano. But on that note, I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I appreciate everybody for listening. We will catch you on the next episode of the Coach Mo Murphy Show. Coach Mo is out.